And to show the slides, you have to do that screen share down there at the bottom. What you pick. Share. So now anyone logged into Zoom will see it like that. And the microphone, what about that? Talk to me about that. What do you
Like right now, if somebody logs in, they can hear us.
Right, yeah. Yep, right there. Just mute it.
Good afternoon.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Howard, how are you doing?
Doing fine. Mark,
Yes.
after I present, I may have to step out. I've had a meeting scheduled up on me this afternoon, but Jacob will be here. If I have to step out, Jacob will be here to answer any questions that come up.
Okay, great.
And I'll try to get back in as quick as I can.
Okay. Well, I don't expect, I figure I kind of figure out some times on this. I'm thinking like maybe an hour or 45 minutes. And I figure like at the end of each presentation, we can have a few questions if time allows. If not, after the 4 guest speakers speak, we'll have a period of questions then. And then right after that would be the end of the meeting.
Okay.
You feel pretty confident.
Clean your boots.
You guys, if you need anything, text. And can you figure out your printer thing?
And you got camera.
Do we have Wes?
Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock, so we'll get this webinar started. Welcome to the Cogongrass Stakeholders Meeting webinar. I'm glad you're joining us today. Cogongrass has been found in Arkansas and possibly ID'd in one location. Even though we only know of one location, the Arkansas Department of Agriculture wanted to take a proactive approach. We reached out to other agencies that would also be dealing with this issue and formed the Cogongrass Work Group. This group has met a few times over the last 6 months to share ideas, strategies, and work on an action plan. It was determined in those meetings that we need to reach out to stakeholders, and that has led us to the Cogongrass Stakeholders Meeting today. The purpose of this webinar is to provide education, information pertaining to Cogongrass to stakeholders and other interested parties. Today, we have 2 staff members presenting along with 4 guest speakers from states that have been dealing with Cogongrass for some time now. So let's start with the introductions. My name is Mark Stoll. I'm the Regulatory Services Manager for the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, and I'll be your host this afternoon. We also have our moderator, Bailey. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bailey Milam. I'm the State Survey Coordinator and Moderator for this meeting.
And our first staff speaker will be Paul.
Good afternoon, Paul Shell. I'm the Plant Inspection and Quarantine Program Manager with Arkansas Department of Agriculture.
And our second staff speaker will be Chandler.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Chandler Barton, Division Forester with the Forestry Division of Department of Ag.
Okay, and I'll introduce each of our guest speakers before their presentation. To give everyone some background information and meeting information, this meeting is being presented in Zoom webinar format. Questions will need to be typed into the Q&A section. We will not be checking the chat box for questions. We will answer questions at the end of each of our guest speakers' presentation if time allows. And we will have a question period after the presentations have ended. If addressing a question to a specific person or presenter, please include their name. This meeting is being recorded and the link will be shared on our website and by the Cogongrass Work Group members. The work group consists of staff from Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Arkansas Department of Transportation, Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission, University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture Extension Services, Arkansas Game and Fish, and USDA APHIS PPQ. Now for some background. Arkansas currently has one known positive location of Cogongrass. In early June of 2021, this population was identified by Charles Bryson, who is a retired botanist for the USDA Research Station at Greenville, Mississippi. He is an expert on this invasive grass. In fact, he was driving through our state to attend a wedding in Eureka Springs in the pouring rain when he identified this. So he knows what he's talking about. He then notified Theo Wetzel, who is a botanist with the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission, who in turn notified ADA and RDOT personnel. On June 16th, 2021, staff from ADA, RDOT, and USDA APHIS PPQ met at this location on Highway 49 in Helena, West Helena. We wanted to assess the population, learn how to identify this plant, and figure out the best way to eliminate the stand. We marked the extent of the stand and sprayed herbicide over the area. The herbicide was a mixture containing one chemical to kill the grass and another chemical to have residual activity to target the underground rhizomes. We also sprayed cleanup applications in August and October of 2021. We are likely looking at 2 applications a growing season for up to 3 years or until we are confident the stand is completely dead. This location will continue to be monitored and we will be starting a Cogongrass survey this spring. Now, Paul Shell will talk about ornamental cultivated varieties of Cogongrass. Paul?
Thanks, Mark. we're going to learn today that Cogongrass is primarily spread through rhizomes and soil containing the rhizomes, and to a lesser extent, seed, wind-borne seed. But there's another way that this plant can be introduced into our state, and that is through an ornamental variety called Japanese bloodgrass or red baron. Thank you. This is a prohibited plant in Arkansas. It's been prohibited for at least 10 years. But the problem with this plant is it can revert back to the original parent Cogongrass, start spreading out of control, putting up flowers and seeds, and escaping from its plantings. So we, as a prohibited plant, it cannot be bought, sold, used in a garden, traded, shared, any kind of use like that, because of the threat that it could escape. Now, like I said, this is a prohibited plant in Arkansas, but with internet sales, there is possibilities that people could purchase this online. It's very difficult to regulate the sale of plants, and not just the big companies. This ad here was from a very large internet seller, but also individual sellers like eBay, Etsy, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist could be potentially selling this plant. So we want to stress that this is a prohibited plant in Arkansas. Do not use it in gardens because of the threat that it can escape. Here is coming up. This is a garden in Arkansas where someone had planted the Japanese bloodgrass underneath Japanese maple. You can see on the right there the purpley reddish leaves, and then all the green grass around there is where that has reverted back to Cogongrass. And it's, of course, the short grass there, that's all been mowed. So there's surely Cogongrass in there as well. And here's another view of it from another angle. You can just see that is out of control. So if you see this in a garden, please let us know. We will work with the landowner to try and get rid of this, and whether through herbicide or through physically removing it. This is a look at underneath all that grass there are all these rhizomes spreading, and it's thick. It's a thick mat of them. So like I said, if you come across this anyway, just let us know. We will work with the landowner. This is a prohibited plant, but we're not trying to levy fines or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure that this does not escape into the environment from gardens. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Chandler Barton will now talk about how to report. Chandler?
Thank you, Vance. So the first confirmation that was found out in West Helena was reported into a tool called iNaturalist. And after some discussion, when this working group was put together, we didn't want to reinvent a way to report Cogongrass or offer some new tool. So what exists in iNaturalist can work for us. And we're recommending that anyone who thinks they may have found a suspect Cogongrass to report it in iNaturalist. One of the benefits of doing this is that there's a huge user community within iNaturalist, including botanists and specialists within our state of Arkansas that can review those uploads of findings. So if you are not familiar with iNaturalist, it's very easy to use. Simply download it in the Apple or Android store. It's a free app. All you have to do is sign up using your email and creating a username and password. And when you do so, you can start to tailor what you see within the application using your account. So that image on the far right, it shows a screen capture of what I have on my iNaturalist. And what you're going to see there is that I've selected Arkansas as my focus area. And there's over 300,000 observations within Arkansas and iNaturalist. So it's a really widely used application. And with it, not just with Cogongrass, you could report anything that you find when in the field or even just on a hike. Next slide. So here's an example of a submission. This is from the user Hambell, and obviously it could be anything that you choose to upload in here. This one's a darter. And one of the main things I wanted to point out is that when a submission is suggested for an ID, it's not yet officially an ID to the species level until it reaches research grade. And you see it's got that little green flag next to the scientific name as research grade because 3 people have confirmed the identification. Another great benefit of using iNaturalist is you can easily see where on a map all of these submissions have been taken. And it's just an excellent way to coordinate all this data. Okay, thanks. So here is our research grade Cogongrass identification in Arkansas. And so just to show that we hope that we don't see more of these in the state, but this is the tool to use. Cogongrass is difficult to identify if you're not familiar with grass identification. So that's the benefit of using iNaturalist, is that you're going to have many other people review the submission and confirm whether what you got is Cogongrass or not. Be sure that when you're in iNaturalist to select the project known as invasive plants of the natural state. You don't have to be within that project to make a submission, but we encourage the use of that project to monitor invasive plants you find throughout the state, including Cogongrass. You can see there in this image, there was over 10,000 observations. I know there's more now. So it's becoming a great resource for spatial data on invasive plants. Here's just a look at some of the projects that are listed in my account. Go ahead. And so just a quick aside, we are asking everyone to use iNaturalist for reporting suspects, but the Department of Agriculture is going to be tracking their survey in a different means so that we can map where surveys have happened or track the actual locations where surveys have happened. Even if we don't find anything, we'll know where we've looked. And so that's why we're using a tool called Quick Capture made by ArcGIS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chandler. Our first guest speaker is Dr. John Bird, and while we're getting his presentation ready, I will do his introduction. I may have to make John Bird host. Dr. John Bird Jr. is an extension research professor at Mississippi State University. John received his BS in agronomy from Clemson University, MS and PhD degrees in weed science from North Carolina State University, but his real education began over 30 years ago when he was hired as a sole extension weed control specialist at Mississippi State University. He has dealt with weed control issues in all commercial, agronomic, and horticultural crops, residential, and commercial landscapes, home gardens, aquatic ecosystems, athletic, residential, and commercial turf, timber production, and natural areas. His research efforts primarily focus on vegetation management, on highway and utility rights of way, forage crops, and invasive weeds in natural areas. John, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Glad to have you.
And am I getting permission to share my slides on my
Yes,
computer?
sir. You're ready to start your presentation.
Okay, so let me know if you can see that one okay. Mark, can you see the slide?
No, it's not up yet.
It's up on my computer.
Are you hitting the share screen button at the bottom of the?
Oh, well, that may be the problem.
Yeah, there's a toolbar on bottom. There we go.
All
Perfect.
right. Now let's try that again.
Yeah.
All right, so I did go back and it has been a year or two since I've really focused on Cogongrass identification and control, but I did pull up some old slide sets, added some new material to it to run through this afternoon. If we were in Arkansas or Mississippi or Alabama, Georgia right now, this is probably what most of the Cogongrass looks like. It is still in a dormant state. From my experience, to me, this is the easiest time of year to identify it, unless it is in bloom, and that's identified when you're traveling down the highway. So I would encourage you to get out and look at that patch that you have in Arkansas. Look at it during dormancy and familiarize yourself with it, because to me it appears to be a little different color than anything else out there. I happened to be down in Leake County in South Mississippi just Monday of this week and took some pictures on the roadsides there. You can see those brown patches, kind of beigeish brown. Does it work? Can you see the arrow when I do this on my computer?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay, so you see those patches there in the highway median. Of course, that has been mowed, and in just a few weeks it will be starting to green up. This week also, I drove through Arkansas along Interstate 40 and realized that there's quite a bit of this in Arkansas. And so in preparation for this webinar this afternoon, I thought back about some things that might easily be confused with Cogongrass, because that was one of the big issues that we encountered when we started doing our survey work back in 20 years ago. Individuals misidentifying Cogongrass or thinking other grasses were Cogongrass, and so I'm going to really try to focus on some things that I think are key. The other thing that I hope to convey in the presentation is the diversity of habitats that we see Cogongrass in the state of Mississippi, and I'm certain Howard would reiterate that in Alabama. If you were in Florida, if you were in Georgia, if you were in South Carolina, you'd probably see the same thing. So this is over near Vicksburg, Mississippi, and for us, and of course you have to watch the weather too, but usually April-ish, mid-April, late April is when you start to see these seed heads emerge. And of course, that's going to be earlier in South Mississippi. It's going to be later, a little bit later, the further north you go. But one of the things that I think is a real key identification feature is Cogongrass, in my recollection, is one of the only warm season grasses. So we're talking about those grasses that grow during the summertime. It's, in my opinion, the only one that greens up and blooms immediately after it transitions out of winter dormant. Now, we have some other grasses that can be confused with Cogongrass, and I'll show some pictures of those as we go through here, but those typically green up, grow for a period of time, and then bloom a little bit later in the summer. Cogongrass, by comparison, dormant, starts growing, blooms immediately, and then it doesn't bloom again unless there's some type of disturbance like mowing or a chemical application that will delay the blooming. And then, of course, you see in the previous slide, in this slide, you see the seed heads that have just emerged and are typically in that anthesis stage of development. Those seeds are being pollinated, and then, of course, those seeds, seed heads turn to these fluffy masses of wind dispersed seeds as the seeds mature. And then, of course, as you mentioned already, that is wind dispersed, and of course on a roadway, a lot of vortex and wind out there with traffic traveling up and down the highway that can scatter those seeds far and wide. This is some CRP. Actually, it's really not CRP. It's adjacent to an airport in the Black Belt Prairie of Mississippi, just about 20 miles south and a little bit east of Starkville. But this is some survey work that we did in a helicopter back in the late 1990s, and you see those circular patches where Cogongrass is just getting established on this prairie soil. And I don't know if that's wind dispersal and the seed landing on a fire ant mound, or seed falling off a piece of mowing equipment, but I'm still perplexed as to how this thing gets moved around at some of the locations where I've seen it. South Mississippi, we frequently see it in timber production, and I've seen it in timber systems, timber ecosystems, much further north, up Pontotoc in Mississippi, on up into Yallabusha County, which is just below Oxford. And of course, this represents one of the potential hazards in South Mississippi. It is a threat to one of our threatened and endangered species, the gopher tortoise, because it can, it's a challenge to the gopher tortoise because it basically chokes out any food habitat and can make their burrows inaccessible. And the other reason I like to show this slide is you can see burning is frequently used to manage understory vegetation in timber systems. This pine tree over on the left-hand side, you can see a soot line way up high where the Cogongrass has surrounded that trunk, versus over to the right where there is no or isn't as much Cogongrass yet. You see a much lower soot line, and so that's an indication that if controlled burning or wildfires go through these timber stands or wooded areas, it shows, in my opinion, documents the potential for flames to get higher on the plant to potentially cause more damage to, especially juvenile trees in timber production systems. And this just shows you some of the research that we did, where we did go into some patches and burn the plant. It does burn readily during the middle of the summer. And so it does have tremendous potential for escape wildfires and that type of thing once you have populations established. We see it in areas that are perhaps not what I would consider improved hay production, but I like to use this slide because if Cogongrass is putting a round bale of hay, we know that seed can persist not a real long sea life based on both what we found published in scientific literature as well as what we have measured ourselves. The seeds don't have a longevity, but nonetheless, if that fresh seed is put into a hay bale and then that hay bale happens to leave the farm or is moved around the farm, then there is a lot more potential for distribution of Cogongrass on that property. We have, some people might say, some beautiful roadsides in South Mississippi in the spring of the year when it blooms, but nonetheless, I wanted to use this image to give you an indication of how highly visible and how distinctive Cogongrass is during that sexual reproductive cycle. When it's blooming in the spring, it is very easy to identify at that point in time. One of the issues that we've seen both with, and I should say challenges, both with county and state and even private sales of topsoil and field dirt. You can see the topsoil there on the pile of dirt on the right that's being sold. In fact, that's not 12 miles from the Mississippi State University campus, and yet you've got Cogongrass growing there that could easily be intermixed with that topsoil, and then if that were moved to another location, those rhizomes will certainly germinate and emerge where that topsoil is offloaded. This is on the Mississippi State campus, a population that has been here even according to Charles Bryson when he was a graduate student at Mississippi State, and he's been retired from USDA 6 or 8 years now. This is on one of the research farm there north of the Mississippi State campus. And I put it in here because I could show you downstream from this location where soil has sloughed off into the creek. It has, during heavy rainfall events, Cogongrass has sloughed off into the creek. The soil has been washed away from the plant, and those floodwaters have carried it further south, and it's become established. And I've seen it not just on the creek that goes through Mississippi, Sand Creek that runs through Mississippi State campus, but I've seen it along sandbars along the Leaf River and other tributaries in the southern part of the state. So another potential route of spread. You did have a really good picture of the rhizomes. I like to use this one because I was told, I inherited this slide when I came to Mississippi State 32 years ago, that this was taken north of Mobile, supposedly where that original ballast soil was taken off the ship at the port of Mobile, and the Cogongrass got established. But it does a real good job of showing just how much rhizome biomass this plant produces. And I also like to use this to remind people that are fighting it, this is the portion of the plant that's got to die if you want to get rid of it. Doesn't matter how much of that biomass above ground you kill, if you don't kill these rhizomes, guess what you're going to have back in a few years. Again, South Mississippi, following Katrina cleanup efforts, we did see tremendous movement of contaminated soil and contaminated debris as we cleaned up following that natural disaster. I went back to another old slide set and added this just a few minutes ago because I wanted to give you an indication. David Patterson was at the Jamie Whitten Research Center prior to Charles Bryson. He did some work with Cogongrass in Mississippi back in the late 70s, and they did some survey work. He published this data. On the left-hand side of this, counties that were infested with Cogongrass back in 1979, and then the counties marked in red over on the right-hand side were counties that we found infested between, let's say, 1998 2008 and 2005. I've got some there that are highlighted in yellow because those are not wild populations of Cogongrass. Those are either research populations in Washington County, or as you had mentioned, populations that had been planted red bear and bloodgrass that had ultimately escaped. And I don't know why, I really don't know why Claiborne County down there is in black, because I've not seen it in Claiborne County. You had a slide that popped up earlier that showed the off-center midrib, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, Mark. I'm not a huge fan of using that characteristic alone as an identification feature. I've seen too many other grasses that occur in our state that also have the off-center midrib. So I'm a bigger fan of encouraging those that are questioning whether or not this is Cogongrass. Number one, if it's at a time of year when seed heads would not be present, look at those rhizomes, and then of course the image up at the very top is a highlight of the auricle and the ligule and the sheath characteristics, which can be much more challenging to see, and certainly a bigger challenge for me 15 years after I took this picture, because my eyes have gotten older, but I still think those are very important characteristics to use for identification purposes. Of course, we're all aware that it does produce wind-dispersed seeds. You can see it there caught on a barbed wire fence, and when I was in Leaksville Monday meeting with the county agent down there and some other people in the county that are trying to beautify some of the roadsides, incidentally, beautify the roadsides in patches of Cogongrass along Highway 63 and 45. And they talked about the fact that you can see these seeds stuck to the grills of vehicles that are traveling through South Mississippi during the springtime when the plant is blooming. The image I just popped up there, I tried my best. Now, there is a piece of dust on that slide when I scanned it. But what I'm circling right here is actually a cluster of Cogongrass seeds that are floating through the air. It's fairly easy to stand on I-55 right-of-way, interstate right-of-way, when this thing is blooming, and you can just watch these seeds as they're floating up. And of course, you can see them fairly easily with the contrast of the pine trees and the other woody vegetation in the background. But once they get above that tree line, it's much more difficult to see. But that is what I've highlighted with this particular image, is the cluster of seeds that are floating through the air. And then oftentimes you see this. These are clusters of seeds that are swirling around in a convenience store parking lot. So copious amounts of seeds. We found, Keith Burnell, the graduate student I had working on this, about 3,000 seeds per inflorescence. And of course, you know the density of the inflorescences per population. Again, another shot of the sheath and the ligule characteristics. I don't see anything else that quite matches this in terms of native or other introduced grasses. So I think those are some really good features for identification purposes. Of course, I've also mentioned the rhizomes. You had an image earlier where you can see those pointed rhizomes. And I've actually didn't put it in here, but I've got pictures where that rhizome has grown through a partially decayed pine cone. I've got a picture of a rhizome growing through an Irish potato that came out of somebody's garden. So be aware that they will penetrate other objects in the soil. Now, I do a lot of meetings for livestock producers and County Cattlemen's Association, and we've got a lot of other grasses that also produce rhizomes. And so I've spent some time thinking how can I differentiate Cogongrass rhizomes, say, from rhizomes of Bermuda grass or Johnson grass? And so I did, Howard, have kind of a lucky moment and thought about a 16-penny nail, because that's about the same diameter as most of the Cogongrass rhizomes. And so you see a 16-penny nail there on the top of that slide, about the same diameter as the Cogongrass rhizome. You see a fence staple there on the bottom, which most livestock producers are familiar with staples for putting up barbed wire and net wire fencing. So those give you or give an individual, a landowner, a reference that I think they would be familiar with to help identify those Cogongrass rhizomes. I've got some pictures here of some that, I'll be quite honest with you, when I first started doing some of this survey work, I put on the brakes and went back to take a closer look. So one of the main ones, and I know I've seen silver beard grass, which is over the two over on the left-hand side of the slide. Of course, you see the silver beard grass down at the bottom, picture that I took back in 1998. And then I've got an image again of that ligule of silver beard grass up at the top. I know I've seen lots of silver beard grass in Arkansas, and I would suspect this will be one that you do get a lot of false positives, is the best way to say it. It does have a seed head that initially, or from visually riding down the highway, can be quite easily confused with Cogongrass. It blooms later in the summer as opposed to blooming initially or immediately after coming out of winter dormancy, which Cogongrass does. So silver beard grass I put over on the left because I think it's probably the one that is most likely to be confused with Cogongrass. Longleaf chasmanthum is the one there that's in the middle. It's a native plant that we often see in wooded or timber understories. And again, quite different when you look at the pubescence or hairs on the stem of that plant. Even if you go back and look at the Cogongrass images, not near that amount of pubescence on that Cogongrass stem that you do find on the longleaf chasmanthum. And it's another one that can have an off-center midrib. And then the one that I've got over on the right is eastern gamagrass, a much larger, more robust plant. But if it has been in a mowed situation and is in the process of regrowing, it can also be confused, may be confused with Cogongrass. Here's an image that I identified on Interstate 59 in North Alabama, Howard. I think back in Lord, this was back in early 2000. You see the patch there that is surrounded by some broom sedge there on the I forget even the mile marker, but I've got the file name by that. I don't know if that patch is still there. I will say too, I will not swear to it, but I think this past summer, coming from my week of purgatory, which is the week I have to spend with my in-laws, I won't refuse to call it a vacation, back through Tennessee, I'm almost convinced I saw a patch of Cogongrass between the Georgia line and Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I'm going to go back and do some survey work again this summer, but I haven't had a chance to follow up on that yet. Way back when I got this map from a modeler when we started getting a little bit of money for Cogongrass research in Mississippi, and they looked at where Cogongrass occurs worldwide, apply those climatic conditions to the U.S., and where you see green in the United States is where they predicted, or their models predicted, Cogongrass would persist as a perennial plant. Now you see some peripheral orange areas around the green, and either because of temperatures or lack of rainfall, their model estimated that Cogongrass would not persist as a perennial. It would die back from year to year, but it would survive as an annual plant, even in those areas that you see indicated with the orange color on the map. And this partly verifies this. I took this picture back in 2017. I went to the Weed Science Society of America board meeting at the Marriott Gateway in Crystal City, Virginia, and lo and behold, what do I find in their landscape bed right outside the hotel property? Our good friend Cogongrass. And I'm wondering, why did somebody plant Cogongrass in Crystal City, Virginia? But that is exactly what that is. I will be back in that vicinity this summer for our WSSA board meeting, and hope to have a chance to take another look and see, is the Cogongrass still widely distributed in that landscape bed? Of course, it's got enough concrete around it. I'm not worried about it spreading vegetatively, but I suspect it will produce seeds, even that in that environment. This is one of the main ways that we see it move: contaminated soil that occurs in a wide variety of areas. We have, and I could take you to a timber producer in South Mississippi. He wrote in his logging contract that they would not drag the harvested timber through the patches of Cogongrass on his property because he didn't want it spread more on his own property. So that's another way that it can be spread. Of course, fighting fire, mowing equipment, especially, and I think timing, Howard, you might address this in a little more detail, but timing of the mowing so that you're not causing that disturbance during the time that it's flowering should help minimize at least the spread by seed production. Some of the work that we've done, of course, some of it is focused on cropping systems and what can be done in cropping systems. I was at this site just a couple years back. We did this work back in probably 2002. They're growing soybeans in this particular area now, because one of the things that I think does have potential as a management strategy in an area that can be cultivated is plant Roundup Ready soybeans in it and use Roundup repeatedly through the summer to try to get rid of it. So I'd put these slides together, kind of summarizing the work that we've done, the research that my colleagues in other states have done, so that I could address Cogongrass management for a variety of landowners or land managers. It is something that can be managed with intensive tillage, and by intensive tillage, I don't mean dragging a subsoiler through it or a chisel plow. It's going to take something like repeated applications of a power takeoff rotary tiller, if you want to, and multiple times per year, will help keep it from spreading. And then, of course, if you do that, you need to be cautious and sanitize that equipment, burn those rhizomes, put them in a microwave. When you clean them off the PTO tiller, put them in the microwave and cook them. Just be sure that you clean that tillage equipment up if you choose to take that approach. I've already mentioned the Roundup Ready soybeans, and of course we've got some other Roundup Ready crops that would work too, but it's going to be one of those things that you can't plant the crop, spray it one time, walk away from it, although we did see fairly good growth suppression using conventional soybeans where we had a good canopy cover and eliminated sunlight from the Cogongrass. We could keep it suppressed in a system like this using some of the graminicides like Post or Fusilade or Select. When we were doing this in cropping systems, but none of them were equal in comparison to the control that we could get with the Roundup Ready soybean system. Of course, we've done a lot of work looking at herbicides, and I've had students look at every herbicide that I could think of that had activity or that I thought had potential to have activity on grasses, perennial grasses. And so the solution that I came up with, if I had Cogongrass on my own property, my farm where I've got my cattle and I cut my hay, I would apply a light rate of Roundup, say a pint per acre or 0.5% solution in the spring at the first sign of it turning green. We have done some work to show that a Roundup application that time of year will eliminate the production of viable seed on that population. It will not kill it. If you apply Roundup, even a heavy rate at that time of year, chances are good that Cogongrass will be green again before frost. So my suggestion is to use a really light rate early in the year and then come back later in the summer with a heavier application of either Roundup, and I have been recommending a 2% solution. I prefer a 1% solution of the 2-pound active ingredient of Mazapir or Arsenal. I think is a much more effective treatment from a control standpoint. And as we know from other research, where you see foliage above ground, those rhizomes have already grown 3 feet beyond where you see above ground foliage. Roundup's not going to have any effect on those rhizomes that are under the ground. Arsenal, we know, has enough residual activity that it will impact those rhizomes that are underground. Now, we've looked at tank mixtures. I personally don't see an advantage to mixing the glyphosate and Arsenal treatment. There may be some more recent research that shows a benefit, but we've not seen it in our research. The one advantage we do see is Arsenal activity is extremely slow. And sometimes I would tell my students when they were spraying a Mazapir, don't even go back and look at that patch of Cogongrass less than 30 days after application, because you're not going to think it's doing anything. So for contractors that may be hired to treat patches of Cogongrass, adding the Roundup to the Arsenal shows the activity of the herbicide treatment much more rapidly than Arsenal by itself. And so you can tell if the entire patch was sprayed, if there happened to be skips that didn't get covered well when you put Roundup in the tank with Arsenal. A lot of the early work out of Florida showed some benefit to burning before making the herbicide application. You know, when you burn a plant like that, you do see an improvement. The other thing that we have noticed is a lot of people want to run a rotary cutter through that patch of Cogongrass and then spray it. And what some of our people with the Department of Ag, when we had our cost share program, we actually went and looked at some areas where that had been done. And if that patch has been there for a length of time, all that biomass that remains on the ground after the rotary mower goes through that patch is basically protecting that Cogongrass from those herbicide applications. So I'm a bigger fan of burning than mowing. And I sometimes think if you mow it and it hadn't been treated before, so you're mowing it for the first time, you're probably better off to burn that biomass before you let the plant regrow and then make your application. The Roundup, you know, there's so many formulations of glyphosate in the market now, and of course, a lot of them I'm afraid are fixing to disappear, sadly, in my opinion. The ones that have a good surfactant in it, I don't think need additional surfactant. If you're using a generic product that does not have surfactant in it, by all means, or if you're using one of those products that has an aquatic label that can be applied on the edge of a ditch or a pond that may have cloven grass growing on the edge of the pond or ditch, you certainly need to add surfactant to those if they don't have it. We've looked at different application volumes, and I think as long as you get good coverage, which I don't think you can get good coverage at 10 gallons per acre. I'm a bigger fan of using 20 to 30 gallons per acre. Make sure you get good coverage. And I do think with arsenal applications or generic imazapyr applications, getting that herbicide on the soil is real important so that it gets down around those roots, and those roots can take it up and it can move within those rhizomes. Till the patch before treating, we have seen really good control if you're using a PTO tiller, but there's very limited sites that would have application, and certainly nothing on a roadside. Remember, when you are spraying, that those rhizomes have already grown 3 feet further than you can see, and I often tell people to spray 5 to 6 feet beyond the above ground biomass. Of course, if you're spraying Roundup, won't do any good for those rhizomes that are underground. Of course, we can skip that. We can skip that last one. No, we can't, because I'm going to show you something getting here closer to the end. All right, a lot of people in South Mississippi want to plant wildlife food plots, and again, I think it's a group that we don't often, at least I don't. I'm sure our people over in wildlife and fisheries talk with them quite frequently. But one of the things that I like to remind them is if they're using, a lot of those guys are using little pretend discs behind a 4-wheeler or ATV. Make sure that you're cleaning the rhizomes off of any of that tillage equipment, and dispose of that properly. Don't just pull it off and throw it off to the side. Pull it off the equipment, put it in a bag, take it home, put it in your fireplace, put it in your microwave, burn it, cook it, whatever, so that you absolutely can kill the viability of those rhizomes. Now, we all know that, I think we all know, if we don't, we should, and I'll show you a picture in a minute. Oak trees are more susceptible to arsenal than Cogongrass, unfortunately. So my suggestion, if you have it, and we see it quite frequently, and in fact, we had one county in Mississippi that went crazy with some arsenal under some live oaks down close to the coast. And believe you me, if you start spraying arsenal under oak trees, you will not have anything but firewood when you start doing that, because oaks and many other hardwoods are highly susceptible to imazapyr. So one of the things, excuse me?
One more minute.
All right, I'm almost done. We did spray some patches last year. I did find a Roundup label that would allow us to apply up to a 10% solution. And so I did find some patches here close to Oktibbeha County that we have sprayed with a 10% solution of Roundup rather than the 2%. We're going to be monitoring regrowth on those as the summer progresses. I want to make you aware too, the infrastructure bill apparently has some money that's going to the Federal Highway Administration, specifically for the management of invasive plants on highway rights of way. And I think that's, I'm glad to see that money available to our DOTs this year, and encourage them to be aware of that, because Cogongrass certainly fits the definition of invasive plant. One other thing I'll mention, you do have a couple of individuals I know in the state of Arkansas that are intimately familiar with Cogongrass. Brett Service is head of the department, the biology department at Henderson State. Brett came here from Oklahoma and got a master's degree in weed science and a PhD in botany. And the majority of his PhD work was in Florida, looking at plant communities. Brett is intimately familiar with Cogongrass and should be an excellent resource. The other one is the young lady sitting there that was a graduate student of mine. She did a master's degree working on Cogongrass management here in Mississippi. She's now working on a PhD at the University of Arkansas. And so you've got these two individuals that are very familiar with Cogongrass identification there in the natural state. So I will now stop my sharing, I think. And turn the program back over to you.
Okay, thank you, John. Next up is going to be Howard Peavy with the highway, or I'm sorry, he's an agronomist manager with Alabama Department of Transportation. And while he is getting his slides together and getting ready to share, I will give his introduction. Bailey, if you'll make Howard host. Okay, Howard, your host, and get your slides ready. Howard graduated from Auburn University with a BS in agronomy, majored in turfgrass management. For the last 20 plus years, he served as a senior agronomist for ALDOT, where he has provided oversight for the vegetation management program as well as other vegetation related activities. Howard?
Thank you, Mark. I would just start by commending you on starting early on the identification and the location of Cogongrass. I always think back to Dr. Ray Dickens, who was my major professor at Auburn University. He did some work in South Alabama back in the early 70s and identified Cogongrass as a very problematic weed. Said then and there that something needed to be done, it needed to be addressed, and he was ignored by most everybody. And here we are today. South Alabama wrapped up Cogongrass, and its reaches all the way to the north part of the state. So good for you guys that you're starting early when you got a chance to be successful, and you're out in front of this. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit with you today. In 2001, we sponsored a research grant through Auburn University. Wilson Faircloth was a grad student over there at that time, and we sponsored a project that he was involved in or was the principal investigator. 3-year study. After 3 years, he published comments. One of the things that he did, he looked at different mowing regimes and pretty much concluded that as a DOT protocol, we would have little to no effect on Cogongrass. He thought going in was maybe something like Johnson grass. If you find Johnson grass in an area that's mowed frequently, you can run it out. Couldn't run it out with our typical mowing protocols, and I don't think, truly, I don't think you'll get it even if it's in a lawn, mowing it as regular as you would. At that time, there was some anecdotal evidence that suggested mowing should not be done when the seed heads are present, and I think everybody agrees with that now. You can see how they've accumulated on front of this tractor here, light, fuzzy. They mass together and fill every little crook and cranny that you can have there. So I think Dr. Bird had mentioned that. Not a good time to mow when the seed heads are present. And Wilson went on to say that you ought to clean your earthwork mowing equipment. Am I still there? Can you hear me? Hello?
If you're still there.
You can still hear me?
Sure.
Hello?
Yes, Howard, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you, Howard.
Okay, good. Anyway, Wilson went on to say that your mowing equipment, earthwork type things that had worked in the Cogongrass area should be cleaned. For a long time, we had a district engineer here in Alabama that was very good at that. When we had mowers come up from South Alabama, he'd meet them at the county line and insist that they be cleaned before they set foot in his district. The other thing Wilson looked at was different fertility rates, didn't have much impact there. And then finally, he like Dr. Bird, he took all the products that we could think of off the shelf, looked at them under different rates, different treatments. And he really came up with 2 products that had some impact on Cogongrass. So at the end of his 3-year study, what he recommended was a treatment of glyphosate alone, 3 pounds AI per acre, or combining that with imazapyr, 1.5 pounds of glyphosate with 3/8 of a pound of imazapyr. And he recommended a 2 treatment per year program, treat in the fall and then come in and put in some kind of a cover crop to establish some competition. We found that the crimson clover worked better for us than the ryegrass. And then followed up in the spring with a treatment of glyphosate, again at 3 pounds AI per acre, and followed by drill seeding of either Bermuda or Bahia grass. That was a program that Wilson came up with this study. And you see over here on the right side of the screen the map of Alabama as it existed. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Now you see that. The map of Alabama as our Cogongrass sightings existed at that time. So our state maintenance engineer at that time came up with put out a memo, and our program was what we would call a Cogongrass Good Neighbor policy. Basically, what it stated was that we knew that if we fought Cogongrass where it crossed the property line or crossed the right-of-way line, if we fought it all the way back to the line and it was on the other side, and the property owner there did nothing, we were fighting a losing battle because it would come right back at us. If we could contact that property owner and he would agree to operate under the same protocols at the same time, then we would address that situation. If not, then we spent our time on those parts of our bodies of Cogongrass that we could get our arms all the way around. The whole body was encased in a right of way. So for several years, you'd ride up and down the road to Alabama, and what you see is a spot that you see here where we had identified it, roped it off, planned to spray it. Maybe a little bit later in the year, you see some spots that were not quite as pretty, where they had been treated with we typically started out with the glyphosate. We did not go with the imazapyr. But this treatment is not appropriate for large scale applications that we would need in Mobile, Baldwin County, or other southern counties. It's good for small. It goes to bare ground. So we pretty much stayed out of Baldwin and Mobile County with these type treatments. In 2008, we were looking at a numbered compound for broadleaf weed control that DuPont wanted us to take a look at. And it was noticed when we were doing that work that some of the plots that we put that in had seemed to slow Cogongrass down greening up in the spring. Over the next 3 years, Dr. Harold Walker and Dr. Jason Belcher at Auburn, now Dr. Walker has since retired and Dr. Belcher's gone on to other activities beyond the university now, but they were there and led this work for us. Like I said, it was a numbered compound. DuPont brought it to the market as Perspective, which was a combination of aminocyclopyrrochlor and chlorsulfuron. What you're looking at here is some of our plot work. The plot on the left is what we would see where we had put that product out. You can see in the foreground, and you see over here in the right, in the background, you see lots of seed heads. You see over here in some of these other plots, the lack of seed heads. And we found out the same thing that Dr. Bird alluded to, that small rates of glyphosate. In fact, we found out even in January and February, if we had 3 or 4 days where the temperature was 60 degrees or more, we had those consecutive days and you got glyphosate on there, then you would inhibit seed head production. But what interested us was this plot here, which the Perspective went in, and this slide over here will show you that we didn't just willy-nilly pick a spot to do our research. This is one of our plots here. And you can see from the seed heads that we are surrounded here by what I'd call good, solid research grade Cogongrass. We went from these plots to some larger demonstration plots in 2012. This is a slide of some work we did on US 43 with the perspective. We were pleased. We got good control. We did not go to bare ground. So based on that plot work, we rolled out an 8+8 program, 8 ounces of perspective and 8 ounces of arsenal per acre. We did use the MSO 1% volume to volume on that. Our recommended timing was October, November, up to 2 to 3 weeks before frost. And again, the major benefit that we found with this particular treatment was that we could do large scale applications and not go to bare ground. In fact, we treated 20 miles of I-65, consecutive 20 miles in I-65 with this program for 2 or 3 years running. And we're pleased. The drawback, obviously, it's more expensive than glyphosate or a combination of glyphosate and imazapyr. And as Dr. Bird mentioned, you need to stay out from under the drip line of trees with this treatment. And I guess finally, drawback for some of you is that perspective was not labeled for pasture or forestry sites. And so it's a roadway only type application. These are some other slides. These applications were made in the fall of 2016. I went back in the spring in 2017. What you're looking at here was an entrance ramp on the I-65 down in South Alabama. It's funny how the sunlight can play on the picture, but that's the same ramp. One picture taken from the top going down, the other picture taken from the bottom going up, taken the same day. But you see, it looks like we've stymied the Cogongrass somewhat. I went back in the summer, took a picture. We did not go to bare ground. It's thin there. We have released other grasses and a good many broadleaf weeds in there, but those can be dealt with. I will tell you that what we found in South Alabama, what we released more than anything else was the rock finger grass. But that's here's another slide of 65 again, the early spring application. The early spring picture after the fall application. Later in the summer, the same area, again, no bare ground, grass in there. This picture was, again, I think this is exit 31 of I-65 down in Baldwin County. I took it from the overpass. You can see our spray line along here, all the way down through there. We sprayed to the ditch down through there. Came back later in the year. We've got grass in here, but it's not Cogongrass. Most of this was the rock finger. So again, we could treat large scale, not go to bare ground. We were pleased with that. The one, I guess, drawback or problem that I had with perspective, we would see every once in a while little areas that seemed to fail on us. The best thing that we could figure is that this was a dry flowable, and perhaps it did not get pre-slurried well. We had little particles that hung up in the nozzle. You'd go for half a mile with a little strip that didn't get controlled, and then you break loose and you'd have good control. Then after a while, you'd have a little spot. I like this slide on the right here. This came about back during the, there was a period of time where the University of Alabama just couldn't seem to make a field goal, and it kept coming back to haunt them. And I love to show this slide. I can tell them that even AlDOT can put it through the uprights. So I had a good time with that slide. But Bayer obtained the Perspective product from DuPont. They made a decision to move away from the dispersible granule and put in a liquid product. That product was Method 240 SL. It's a single component, only aminocyclopyrophor, no chlorsilceron. When they made that change, we adjusted our program somewhat to Method at 12 ounces per acre. That was in order to provide the same rate of the aminocyclopyrophor, and we dropped our imazapyr or our arsenal rate to 4 ounces. It was a little rough in those areas that had any Bahia grass at all, so we dropped that, and that's what we're now going with. So we have 3 treatment recommendations. The glyphosate 3 pounds, the glyphosate at 1.5 pounds plus the imazapyr that came from Dr. Fairclough's research. Those are multiple treatments per year, spring and fall. And then we've got our single annual treatment method. You'll see that our forestry folks here recommend a little bit different rate, glyphosate 3.5 to 6% plus imazapyr. I don't truly think it makes any difference which of those you use. The key is, as you're starting here, early detection and action and persistence. Dr. Fairclough said in his report, repeat treatments were needed. If he didn't repeat his program for 3 years running, you didn't get full control. And we've seen that. We've had some of our guys that would treat some small spots here and there along the roadside, treat them perhaps in the fall, maybe come back in the next spring, take a look at them the next summer, think they've got it, walk off and leave it. 18 months later, it's back at you. Again, I think you can get control with all of these, and you'll see rates that have been tweaked. I think Dr. Bird's rates were a little bit different from what we're using. But what is most important is that you stay on top of it. And I think 3 years is a fair number. And you'll get control with any of these. And the last thing I put up here is oops, I went too far, is a Cogongrass ID poster. This was part of the result of Wilson Fairclough's research. We printed these out. ALDOT paid for the research, ALDOT paid for the posters. So I don't think there's any problem. If you want to print some of these out or make a poster of them, there shouldn't be any problem. But basically what we did was we went through some characteristics of identification of Cogongrass, and then some of the grasses that might be confused. I would agree with what Dr. Bird said, and what we've seen here in Alabama is that the silver beard grass is the one that is most often confused. I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've been called to go out and look at a Cogongrass sighting, and it's silver beard grass. So that's what I have to share. Answer any questions you might have.
All right, I appreciate it. I think what we may do, I don't see any questions pop up. I think we're just gonna go ahead and go into Mark McClure's talk and save the questions for after Mark and Tyler talk. So Mark, if you're ready, you can start getting your stuff ready, and I will do your introduction. And thanks again, Howard. Mark McClure is a forest health specialist with Georgia Forestry Commission. Mark attended Clemson University, where he graduated with a BS degree in forest resource management in 1991. Mark began his career with the Georgia Forestry Commission in April of '92 as a county management forester. Mark assumed the duties of regional forest health specialist for Southwest Georgia in June of 2006. In addition to forest insect and disease issues, he serves as the Cogongrass project leader for Georgia. Mark?
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All righty. For today, I'll talk a little bit about forest operations and fire. It's already been mentioned a little bit. But by and large, that's what we see in most of it in the state of Georgia. We do our own treatments in-house, and 75% of the spots that we found over the last 15, 16 years has been in pine plantations or pine timber type anyway. And as already been mentioned multiple times, the two key components you got to address is the flowers and the rhizomes. Some people think this is a pretty picture. I've shown it at garden clubs before, and they think, oh, that looks so good. Not if it's growing on your property, it doesn't. But as you can see, it produces a large quantity of flowers. But with 75% of it in Georgia, in the woodlands, 18% is on right of way. We just heard about the right-of-ways and treatments. I'm not gonna get into the treatments on my side of it, but it's really some of the stuff, and it's almost a review of a few items that Dr. Bird hit on that's just key important things to remember. So the major concern is the movement of Cogongrass, whether this is on an individual site, movement from one point to another, or moving from one landowner to another landowner, or whether it's across county lines or across state lines. We have all of these issues here being in the southwest corner of Georgia. We've experienced all of these problems. So with a site here, flowering, this was a photo taken in April of within the last year or two, but you can see growing right up under a stand of planted pine. Avenues of spread and harvesting equipment, by and large, this is our primary mode of spread in the woodlands. Timber's thin, you bring the equipment in and you cut timber, you drag through these areas, you move it on site, and then if it's there and you move it through, drag through it and get it on the equipment, and then it's go transfer to another site. In this same photo, Dr. Bird showed earlier, seed, if you're in these spots during the spring when it's flowering, the seeds just go get caught up on the equipment, whether it's around the radiator intakes, or it can be just anywhere on the piece of equipment. The rhizomes, this is the primary problem here in Georgia. When we're moving these spots around, it's moving the rhizome material much more so than seed material. And you can tell, as seen by multiple photos today, that the rhizomes is a very dense rhizome system that's very difficult to kill, and it's very easily moved around by mechanical means. Other means of equipment, tree planting, whether you get the rhizome material caught up within the tree planters themselves. Very common, I've seen this, planting sites, they were unaware of Cogongrass on the property, drove the tree planter right through the area, and 2 or 3 years later, it's just growing all along that tree planted row, where they sprigged it basically as they were planting their pines. A scalper here, old field site, but especially pasture sites. Some of the CRP sites are scalped and then planted. As you can see, the rhizome material get caught up around the foot, and you just drag it across the site. Mowing, it's been mentioned. For the most part, I do not like mowers in Cogongrass, but as you can tell, with all the flower heads in the spring, that mower deck's just gonna be a seed bed for material to move from site to site and throughout the property you're on. Whether it's fire breaks plowed by the landowners, forestry commission, but this too, just another avenue when we're looking at equipment on the site. If you contracting someone to come in and do fire breaks, think about, maybe you don't have Cogongrass on your property, but think about, where did that piece of equipment come from? What site were they on, working on before they moved on to your property? And as we spend a lot of time with education in-house with our own fire control personnel, when they're out plowing fire breaks, it's easily moved around if you're not paying close attention. Here's a fire break right here. It just went right through a patch of Cogongrass. So that it's probably pretty obvious. It's probably caught up all over the plow of the equipment. This photo right here, really just to make everybody think a little bit about when you're doing inwoods, whether it's a road construction, maybe you're doing road maintenance, but here with a new road construction, several things to think about. Installed a culvert here, as you can see that maybe they brought in field dirt. And the question is, where did they bring the field dirt from? Was it in a site that may have had Cogongrass in it? So that would be a potential avenue of bringing it in on this site. The gravel that was laid out, was it from an area with potentially seed, Cogongrass seed in the rock that you brought in on the property? The straw you see on the photo, where did that come from? I mean, these are really big things. Did it come from an area that has a lot of Cogongrass and again, seed in that straw material? It's just potential avenue of spread onto your property. This is very common here in Southwest Georgia. A lot of county graded roads. You get this, you get a little spot going along the edge of the road, and when they start pulling the ditches, it's very common. The grader would catch the rhizomes and just spread it up and down the road. So something you have to be aware of. And a lot of times it's on your own property. Some of the plantations have their own equipment, maintaining their own roads. Same thing to think about. And this here again is just showing the avenue for rhizomes to get all into the tracks of the equipment, the seed to be in around the intake, the radiator area. More avenues of spread to think about. Food plots. Mentioned it earlier a little. Food in Southwest Georgia, we have a lot of out-of-state hunters that lease property. They bring their own equipment to the site to establish and maintain their own food plots. So as landowners, we very often times advise landowners, if you got a hunting club out of state, you may ask them to clean their equipment before they bring it on site, because they may be bringing the invasive with them, not even realizing it. And this is another thing, as they bring their equipment, just another mode of spread we mentioned. If you're bringing it from an area that may have Cogongrass, it could be on the Hera, on a piece of equipment. This would go back. We highly recommend equipment like this that landowners encourage the cleaning of equipment before it comes onto the property. So some of the impacts of fire. As we've seen from the photos, we know Cogongrass creates a very dense thatch layer that burns at high temperatures. As a result, it's very common, a lot of the sites that I look at here in Georgia, the overstory trees are frequently killed. When I go out to look at a spot, the landowner that burns frequently on a 2 to 3 year rotation, it's very common that it's burnt so hot that over time they've actually killed the trees. And I believe if all you go do is burn an area of Cogongrass and never apply herbicide, you probably just go enhance the growth of the plant. This here is just a close-up showing in a pre-commercial stand of pine, just the wintertime thatch layer that's built. that builds up. As you can see in this photo, if you ever got a fire in this during the winter months, it would most likely consume these young trees here. This was a site we worked on. It's probably been 10 years ago. As you can tell, this grass was nearly 5 to 6 feet tall, and you can tell just how thick it is. And from a fire standpoint, that was a control burn. And you can see how intense the flame length is with a control burn. Burns extremely high. That's another different site, control burn. You can see with the fence post right there, you're getting some pretty high flame lengths just with a dry fire on it. So, but when it comes to spraying, in preference, a control burn will eliminate that thatch layer prior to herbicide application, which allows the herbicide to make direct contact with the new green growth. And that treatment's much more effective than trying to spray over the top of a dense thatch. And if you time your fire just right, you can get some suppression of the flower production in spring if it's a late burn. A lot of our plantations don't see a lot of flowering, but they also burn in April, late March into April, so they suppress some of it. And because, again, it burns at high temperatures, there is a risk of tree damage or mortality. So basically, this is just a review of what we've talked about. But number one, you've got to learn the ID characteristics. Dr. Bird went over that. We here in Georgia, we still spend time educating special groups and landowners. We've been doing this for 17 years. You cannot emphasize it enough. You've got to learn how to identify. Spring survey is great when it's flowering. Very readily, it's visible. It's very easy to see. However, I agree 100% with Dr. Bird. For me personally, I would rather winter survey in the dormant season. It's very easy to see it during the winter. It's got that very distinct tan color to it. Just sticks out. And if you do find a spot, we recommend mark it and keep equipment out of it. Do not mechanically disturb the site once you detect it. Don't mow it, don't grade it, don't till it, don't move soil. And again, this is primarily we're talking about in the woods here. I'm not doing a whole lot of work with sites in open areas, open pasture areas, open fields. This is primarily in the woods. And then I encourage report to proper authorities, whatever the reporting technique you have for your area, do that. And then apply the appropriate herbicide treatments, whatever prescriptions you come up with, and monitor annually and retreat as needed. I've been treating personally here in Georgia for 16 years. The one thing I would say, and it was just said prior to me, persistence. Don't spray this grass once or twice and think, oh, I have it. I've really taken care of it. I've sprayed sites, and I monitor some of these sites for 7, 8 years just to see what it's going to do. Here in Georgia, I go on, if it's clear and no regrowth of Cogongrass for 3 years, we'll consider it eradicated. However, remember, you're dealing with an invasive plant. and a very invasive plant. My recommendation, 99% of the time, that is probably true. If you've made multiple herbicide applications and you followed it for multiple years and you've seen 3 years of nothing, no Cogongrass resprouting, you've probably eradicated it. But that is not always the case, because I've had instances where 3 years, and I've seen on year 4, go back to the site and you'll see 2 or 3 sprouts come back. So if I would have walked away from that site and did nothing, and say came back year 5 or year 6, Cogongrass would probably be growing at a pretty healthy rate again on that site. So persistence, you've got to stick with it, but you can get rid of it. And from my experience, and I think several folks has made comment, imazapyr, the most effective mode of treatment that I've had here in Georgia is imazapyr. It's soil active. You've got to kill those rhizomes, and it's very difficult to do that with just glyphosate alone. But you got to stop the spread beyond its current location, and that's the key. That's the goal. If we have it here in the woods, we don't want it cultivated. We spend a lot of time, especially I mentioned earlier with fire breaks. We don't want our personnel harrying or plowing fire breaks through a Cogongrass area. So in order not to move the rhizome material, food plots, we really prefer that they don't harrow food plots. If it's known Cogongrass, treat it first. And mowing, I don't like mowing on infested sites at all. As Dr. Bird mentioned, it's more difficult to spray a site. It's much better burn the site off, if at all possible, to remove that thatch. And especially don't mow, period, if it's during the flowering season. And if possible, clean the equipment. We've got some landowners that contractors, before they can come on the property, they require them to have a cleaning station set up. They have a designated area that they can clean it on their property. That way, if any Cogongrass does come up, it's going to be located in that one central area. But this is not always possible. And it's a topic in and of itself when you start speaking logging equipment and cleaning logging equipment. That's a whole nother ball game, and a can of worms to open up when it comes to cleaning logging equipment. But the key is going to be, it's going to take some kind of sanitation in order to keep moving the rhizome seed material from site to site or from landowner to landowner. And that's pretty much, Mark, that's just covering the equipment and the burning side of it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And our next speaker is going to be Tyler Cloud. Tyler, we're going to turn the host over to you so you can share your screen and I'll give your introduction. And thanks again, Mark. Tyler Cloud is a forestry program specialist with Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Tyler graduated from Louisiana Tech in 2018 and has been working with LDAF for 3 years. Tyler, you ready?
Yes, sir. How are y'all doing this afternoon?
Good, how are you?
Oh, can't complain none. Like I said, my name's Tyler Cloud. I'm the Forest Health Specialist for Department of Ag and Forestry. I recently took over for Brent Cottrell, who started our Cogongrass program. And our program has been very successful in keeping Cogongrass isolated to a select area of the state, which is the Florida parishes. The way we survey it, it's kind of very basic. The way we do it is our landowners, they'll go out and they'll look at their fields, whatever, and they'll contact either me or their unit forester. And at that point, it's getting crews out there to go out there and inspect it. And once we get a crew out there to inspect it, they're looking, for all of the signs of Cogongrass, whether it's the flowering seeds or just the difference, the noticeable difference between that and any other pasture grass out there. When we do confirm that it is Cogongrass, we typically use a 5-foot buffer on our GPS when we mark it. Once we have it GPS marked and know where it is, we will then go to a landowner and ask them if they want to enroll in our Cogongrass program. And our Cogongrass program is free to the landowners. We use grants to fund it. And what we normally do is we'll get it in our system through ArcGIS. And at that point, we'll contact our consultant that we use to spray the Cogongrass, because in that area, we're very busy with wildfires. So our personnel is stretched thin as is. So we contract that out. And at that point, the contractor has his list of areas and landowners to go and spray. He'll spray them for 3, 4, 5 months, depending on how busy they get with hurricane cleanup. Like I said, we use a 5-foot buffer. That's just to account for the underground rhizomes, like everyone else has said. I know that's kind of the minimum, but when we're dealing with landowners not paying for any of this, we use that to kind of stretch the money a little bit farther so we can take care of more landowners. Our program, it's a 3-year contract, but there is always the option to add on, to extend that contract, because it takes 3 to 4 years to get that keel. And the way our program is set up, it's basically just as a handoff. We get them to where we're either eradicating the Cogongrass from that property, or until we get it to a manageable size that that landowner can take care of it from there on. Yes, sir.
Can you advance your slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, because once you share, you've got control on that.
Sir?
We're seeing the
Yeah, we're still seeing
PowerPoint program
PowerPoint
screen.
Title
program.
page.
Did you hit the green button at the bottom where it says share screen? I guess you did that, but I don't know if it started the PowerPoint itself.
That's weird. It's sharing on my end.
You have 2 screens?
Nuh-uh.
Oh. You might be sharing the application instead of your screen.
Let me see something. Can y'all see it now?
It's still okay, there we go. And like, so now, yeah, try sharing again.
How about now?
No, we're just seeing you on
Yeah.
Zoom.
Huh. That is weird.
Go ahead and stop share and try again, selecting the PowerPoint.
Okay, so we have that. So see if you can start your PowerPoint slideshow.
All right, can y'all see it now?
Yeah, we can see your screen, and it is on LEAF Cogongrass program. So I guess slide number 3.
Yes, sir. Well,
Okay.
Oh, why is it not showing the? Well, I'll just do it like this because it's easier like
Okay.
that.
Yeah, that'll work, thanks.
Okay, so like I said, we typically leave it, a contract of about 3 years or so, but we leave that option there to extend and add on to that contract, just because it takes so many years of repetitive action to eradicate it. Like I said, and our program is more geared towards handing it off towards the landowners. We get it to a point where they can manage it, because the vast majority of our Cogongrass in Louisiana, in the Florida parishes, is in agricultural fields, such as hay fields or livestock fields. So most of our landowners that we're dealing with, they're very antsy about getting it taken care of. They're wanting it done right away, which I understand, but a lot of them have a hard time realizing that it takes several years for it to really take hold and to really take effect. So that's our biggest issue is conveying that to them. But like I said, we have that option to extend it, because sometimes it does take longer. And here is a map that shows just the concentration of Cogongrass in Louisiana. And like I said, it's primarily in the Florida parishes. We have it a little bit in Livingston and St. Helena, but we have it 90% in Tangipahoa, St. Tammany, and Washington parishes. And that's all I've got.
Tyler?
Yes, sir.
I guess at this point, we'll check with Bailey to see anybody has posted any questions for any of our panelists. Yes, if anyone has any questions, they can post those in the question and answer portion of the Zoom program, and we'll read off the question and see what the answer is. If the question is pointed at a particular person, please include their name.
Yeah, are there any questions? No, I mean, are there any questions?
Not on my side.
We've gone over that.
No questions.
No questions.
Okay. I do want to thank our speakers for talking today, and we are now joined by Secretary Ward for the Arkansas Department of Agriculture. We're going to turn this over to Secretary Ward if there's no questions, which I see none on the screen, and Secretary Ward is going to talk to us for just a minute.
Okay, well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And I too just want to say thank you to the speakers today. I appreciate y'all taking time out of y'all's schedules. And it's just really good to hear y'all's perspective and input on really how we can address this here in Arkansas. And so, certainly just for the broader group, when we had that first detection one, it was a team effort that was involved in identification and moving to respond to that. But what we were hearing broadly was just the impact that it would have to the state of Arkansas if it spread. We had legislators who were familiar with some of the forestry impacts. We've had people who were aware with some of the pasture hay impacts. And so if you look at just the broader impact to our state and the agriculture industry, we recognize pretty quickly just how important this topic was. And so I want to say thank you again to Mark for helping to put this together, to our speakers for taking your time to lend your perspective on how we can address this from a state standpoint. But for us, it's something that we've talked about several times with leadership within the department, but even externally as well. So certainly our division directors with Scott and Patrick, with Joe, Chris Callclaser, and I'm assuming they're all on here. I know that they were going to participate as much as they could, but it's a topic that we've talked about several times. And so it's a priority for us. And that's why we wanted to have this broader training really so that the entire department was aware of the tools available, as well as the identification and how to respond, should we see more of this. And so again, Mark, thank you for helping to organize this and put this together. It's important. Appreciate everybody's attention, even on a Friday afternoon. And with that, I'll turn back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Ward. That is all that we have. Still, Bailey, is there any questions? No questions. I want to thank Bailey for being moderator, Chandler and Paul. They've been a big help in getting this together. And thank you for attending the Cogongrass Stakeholders webinar. Like we said before, we will, this meeting was being recorded, so we'll make that link available so we can use that for educational purposes at later dates and get that out to different groups, different stakeholders. And I hope we can all work together to control and eliminate this invasive species from Arkansas. And thank you for your attendance.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. The presentations were excellent. Thank you very much.